Today, we're diving into the Green Party's platform on economic justice. And this isn't just about a few tweaks to the system we already have. Nope, this is a total, fundamental rethinking of what an economy should even be for. Let's get into it.
And it all kicks off with this core idea right here. This isn't about telling everyone to live with less for the sake of it. It's about completely redefining what it means to be prosperous. The whole platform basically argues for less stuff, sure, but more happiness, challenging that big assumption that buying more always makes us better off.
So, here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with their ultimate goal, then we'll look at their diagnosis of the current problem, and finally, we'll walk through their three main pillars for the solution.
First up, let's talk about changing the goal itself. The Green Platform argues that before we can even begin to fix the economy, we all have to agree on a new destination, one that goes way beyond just dollars and cents. And this slide really nails the difference. On the left, you've got the current obsession, GDP, gross domestic product, which at the end of the day is just a measure of how much money is churning through the system. But on the right, you have the green goal, a quality of life measurement that would track things like our health, the strength of our communities, and the well-being of our environment.
This all leads to their ideal model, what they call a steady state economy. Now, this does not mean zero progress or zero development. It's about focusing on getting better, not just bigger. Improving our technology, our health, our education, all while staying within the actual physical limits of our planet. Okay, so let's shift gears and dig into the Green Party's diagnosis. What exactly do they see as the big problems with the way things are right now? At its absolute core, the platform points to this one fundamental contradiction. Our whole economic system is built on the idea of endless, infinite growth, which is just not possible on a planet with limited resources. They see this as the central conflict that we have to resolve. And they say this core flaw has some pretty massive consequences. They point to climate change, calling it the greatest market failure in history. They also connect this endless growth model to skyrocketing inequality, the destruction of our shared resources, things like clean air and water, and of course, the huge amounts of money spent on the military instead of on social needs. So how do you even begin to fix a market that's causing all these problems? Well, one of their key ideas is something called true cost pricing. The concept is actually pretty simple. The price you pay for a product, let's say a gallon of gas, should include all the hidden costs, like the cost of air pollution and climate damage. It's about making things that are bad for society reflect that real burden in their price tag. All right, now we get to the good stuff, the solutions. The first pillar is all about strengthening the economic security of regular people and their local communities. A huge piece of this is universal basic income, or UBI. This would be a direct, guaranteed payment to every single adult, enough to create an economic floor so that everyone can afford the basics like food and shelter. It's really designed to give people a foundation of security, especially in an era where jobs are becoming less and less stable. Okay, so the big question, how do you pay for all this? Well, the platform calls for a pretty massive overhaul of the tax system. The main goal is to shift the tax burden away from everyday working people and onto things like corporate profits, Wall Street speculation, and huge piles of wealth. They sum up this whole philosophy with a pretty catchy name, the green tax shift. The logic is really a simple three-part idea. Use the tax code to discourage the things we don't want, like pollution, and to encourage the things we do want, like good jobs and sustainable businesses. All right, on to pillar 2, which builds on the first one. This part is a direct challenge to the power and the entire purpose of giant corporations. Yeah, the platform really doesn't pull any punches here. It sees the modern multinational corporation, a legal entity designed to maximize profit above all else, as one of the primary drivers of our biggest global problems. And their solutions are just as direct. They're calling for an end to corporate personhood. That's the idea that corporations have the same constitutional rights as actual people. They also propose forcing corporations to have federal charters that require social responsibility, and even yanking those charters if they repeatedly cause harm. This same philosophy extends to how they view global trade. This slide really breaks it down. They contrast the current model of so-called free trade, which they say puts corporate profits first, with their vision for fair trade, which would put protections for workers, communities, and the environment at the top of the list. And that brings us to the third and final pillar. This one is probably the most radical of them all, because it targets the very creation of money and the structure of our entire financial system. This central goal here is really ambitious.
It's to shift the power to create money away from private banks, which is where it mostly happens today whenever they make a loan, and return that power to a public accountable authority. They call this plan greening the dollar. It's a three-step process. First, nationalize the Federal Reserve System to bring it fully under public control. Second, have a new public body create money that's debt-free. And third, spend that new money directly into the economy on things we all need, like infrastructure, education, and healthcare. On top of that huge change, they propose a whole list of other major financial reforms. Things like breaking up the too-big-to-fail banks, bringing back old-school regulations like Glass-Steagall, forgiving all student loan debt, and capping interest rates to stop predatory lending. So when you put all of these pieces together, the big idea becomes pretty clear. What they're proposing is a massive transition, a shift from an economy based on extracting resources and accumulating private wealth to one that's based on ecological sustainability and well-being that's shared by everybody. What's really fascinating is how the platform positions itself as an alternative to both of the dominant ways of thinking. It argues for a decentralized economy based in communities, rather than one controlled by either corporate boardrooms or big government bureaucracies. And that leaves us with the one huge question that's really at the heart of this entire platform. It challenges all of us to imagine a system built from the ground up, not for the sake of just getting bigger and bigger, but for the sake of human and ecological well-being. What would that world actually look like?